2 men went up to a temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give my tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to the heavens, but he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be abased, and who humbles himself will be exalted.
I want to say a couple of things to you before I begin the lesson itself. I want to give a special thanks to your overseers here. This meeting was supposed to take place in September, and October, yeah. My wife was supposed to have eye surgery in September, and she was unable to have that because she and I got COVID, like everything we do together. And so they had to postpone her surgery, and the only open date was October. And October came and brought hurricanes. And we were unable to have the surgery then, and we had hurricanes all around us. We still have 5 families in our congregation that are displaced. They have no homes to go back to. They have a shell, but they have nothing inside. They lost everything they had physically, except they didn't lose anything that mattered spiritually. And so when I talked with Mark about this and I said, I can't come, you were so kind to move this meeting to a time that would work. My wife has now had the surgery, and she's home recovering from that, and it'll be a process before she regains all of her sight in her right eye, but she's doing well. Doctors are happy with her progress, and I'm grateful to be here. If this was a really, really bad time for you and you say, I don't know why we had this meeting with this guy in December, that's my fault. But if you say that was great that we were able to at least reschedule that, then talk to your overseers and thank them for that, because it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for your shepherds in this congregation. And I'm grateful to be here. It's my 7th time to be with this congregation, 7 times. And the first time in the late 90s I was here. So I'm so happy to be back with you. And I love this series. I send out information about themes that we can talk about, and this is one of those that when a congregation says, we'd like to hear these, I go, yes, that's good. Not that I don't like the others, but this one I particularly like to present, and I'm very happy that God has allowed us to be together to do this. So I bring you greetings from the brothers and sisters at Henderson Boulevard. I bring you greetings from the Sunshine State, which these past couple of months has been the plywood state, because we've had 2 major hurricanes that hit us one after another within 10 days. And we've had quite a bit of devastation. You can still see much of it around us. But the saints' hearts are emboldened to serve the Lord Jesus Christ and to be faithful to him and to recognize what really matters and what doesn't. And that's an important lesson to learn, even if we have to learn it the hard way. So I'm glad that we're able to be here this week. And you've heard the reading of the text, so let's go to that text in a little bit of detail now, shall we? This is, like our earlier lesson, in some ways a similar pattern. I want you to notice, as you heard read, he told this parable to some people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and viewed others with contempt. Now, a few things that strike me about that. First of all, I'm sure Jesus didn't invite them that way to his meeting. I'm sure he did not say, and we have a special meeting coming up, and I'm going to be talking about some things that would be really helpful to people who view themselves as righteous and view others with contempt. If you're in that category, come for the lessons. Jesus recognized that in people. And I'm going to suggest this to you. You may begin to recognize this in people today. As a result of what we're going to talk about, you may recognize you know people like this. And one of them may be in a mirror. These people didn't understand this is what they were when Jesus begins this address. But as he is talking with people, he's recognizing some of the reactions he's getting to things he is saying. And like our earlier talk at 9, Jesus recognizes they need a lesson, and he composes one on the spot. Again, this is not a parable Jesus had on a note card and brought with him and said, now my next lesson is on this. He is responding with, let me tell you a story. And stories bring us in. They make us lean in, and we're eager to hear what is going to be said. And Jesus, like the other parable we looked at, starts out with a bold statement that draws attention. He says, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. Now, just stop and think about that for a moment. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. If we didn't know this parable at all, and that's what I'm trying to get you to see it with fresh eyes, and new ears. Listen to this. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. We assume automatically they're 2 really righteous people, don't we? Because not only are they praying, they're making it a point to go up to the temple to pray. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem and you've seen the temple, you mount the temple. It is not like coming in these doors. It's not like walking up a couple of curbs and coming in. We're talking about going upstairs. We're talking about going 2 to 3 stories high. And no elevators. They went up to the temple. They're looking to be in proximity to the God who inhabits that house. They long to be closer to him. And they're going to pray. 2 men going to pray. And we draw conclusions about them. They're righteous men. They're godly men. And Jesus he knows what he's doing. He is playing us. Now, I don't mean he's deceiving us at all, not at all. He's playing us. He's pulling us in with the story. So we've drawn this conclusion. 2 righteous men are doing something, and he says one is a Pharisee. And we go, oh, well, of course, he's a Pharisee. One of them is, because they're the most righteous people we know. And the people Jesus is talking to, those who feel they are righteous and hold others in contempt, who are they? They're the Pharisees. Go look up Pharisee in a Jewish dictionary of that time, and it would say, one who is righteous and holds others in contempt. Not really, but they felt that way about everybody. Their name means the separated ones. They are the separatists. And who are they separated from? Well, everybody. We're better than you are. They are the front of the bus, the front of the bus, the front of the bus. They are the front of the bus, and where's the back? Nobody there. Nobody worth their consideration. One was a Pharisee, and the Pharisees go, yeah. But then you're wondering, so who is the other one? Two righteous men. The Pharisees are the separatists. They're exclusive. Who is going to come up? Do you see how he's drawing in those people? You see how he's getting their attention? One was a Pharisee, and their question is, well, who's the other? And then he says this. Remember, two men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other, wait for it, a tax collector. A tax collector. To put that in terms that you would relate to, two incredibly astute, knowledgeable basketball lovers went into an arena to watch, and one was a UK fan, and the other was a Cardinal. Now, I don't have those feelings. When we lived here in Louisville, I never understood why everybody wasn't a Cardinal fan, because this is our city. But you understand how a person who loves UK, or you could reverse it, who loves U of L, would think, okay, two knowledgeable, great lovers of the sport of basketball with bragging rights appear. One of them is us, and then you name the most unlikely candidate as the other person. Two men went up to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. And all the Pharisees winced. Oh, tax collector. You named them? Like, I'm not going into a lot of detail. You know, you've heard preachers and teachers tell it all the time. The tax collectors were in bed with the Romans. The Jews hated the tax collectors because even though they were from among them, they did nothing but bilk them and suck the people dry with the taxes that not only they gathered for Rome, but the taxes they collected for themselves above and beyond that. Nobody liked the tax collectors. And nobody thought they were righteous. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. Okay, now we're listening. Well, now tell us what's going on. And Jesus begins with a Pharisee. And the Pharisee stood and he was praying this. The New American Standard says, to himself. Some versions say, with himself. The New International Version says he was praying this about himself. I want you to notice that in all three of those translations, the one commonality is himself. This prayer is not so much about God as it is about him. This is about the Pharisee. And here is what he prays. I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people. That I'm not like other people. And then, just so that God will know who he's talking about, swindlers, the unjust, adulterers. Now, think about those three groups of people. Just think about those three groups of people. Swindlers. What are they? They're not out and out robbers. They're clever robbers. Swindlers are people that take your money and in many cases leave you thinking that you're in a good position. They're smooth. Like the guy said, I know a lawyer, he is so good, he can take your socks off and never untie your shoelaces. That's a good lawyer. I mean, that's a smooth lawyer. Swindlers are like that. They can take your money and you never even realized you lost it till you try to count it. And then the unjust, people that have no true sense of right and wrong. They do whatever they want. We encounter these people on the roads all the time, don't we? Unjust people on the highways. They're the ones that run up beside you when you're supposed to merge, and while everybody else is dutifully getting in line before the lane runs out, they're the ones that run all the way up to the front and then put on their blinker like, let me in, let me in, let me in. And feel good about the fact that they bypassed 20 cars that were doing the right thing. The unjust. I'm painting a picture of two kinds of people that most of us don't have a high regard for. And then he adds perhaps one of the most immoral kinds of persons, adulterers. People who renege on the promises they made before God to a mate, who abandon a relationship for a selfish relationship they want to pursue. Okay, you got a group of three, and none of them are admirable people. And we can understand why the Pharisee might say, I don't want to be those people. And then it's almost an afterthought, but it's because he sees that man that he says, or even like this tax collector. Now, I don't know whether this, in the parable, the Pharisee knew the tax collector, or he's got something about him that said maybe he's got tax collector on his robe, you know, they embroidery it on there or something. But there's some reason why he recognizes him as a tax collector, and he points him out specifically. Might be one of the reasons why it's good sometimes for us to close our eyes in prayer, because you can't concentrate on everybody around you. Now, the Pharisees, in hearing this, have a real clear idea already of who the hero is and who the villain is. Jesus painted that for them when he said, two men went up to pray. One was a Pharisee, hero, and the other a tax collector, boo. And then when the prayer occurs, the Pharisees are probably comfortable with that. I don't know that they would say, yep, that's a prayer I pray all the time, but they would certainly understand why it is that one of them would be proud of and thankful for their separatism. We're not like those other people. The tax collector in this story at least, serves as the low man on the totem pole that makes everybody else feel good about themselves. That's his purpose in the parable. He's the low guy on the totem pole. I remember on one occasion my mother got real upset at me. I was misbehaving. I wasn't being very good. And she just finally got so exasperated. She said, you know what, son? If you can't do anything else in life, at least you can serve as a bad example. I hope I've surpassed that by now in my life. But you understand, if you can't do anything else, I mean, you're worthless in good things, but at least you can serve as a bad example, and people can point you out as you don't want to end up like Ralph. The tax collector serves that purpose. I'm thankful that I'm not like him. I'm better than that. I'm thankful for that. He could always make you thankful you weren't him. So at this point in the parable, the Pharisees are feeling pretty good about themselves. And Jesus is going to continue to draw them in a little deeper before he snaps the trap shut on them. Because it now switches from the Pharisee who is standing and praying to the tax collector, standing some distance away. Away from who? In the parable, from the righteous guy. He's distanced from the righteous guy. And he is even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven. I want to suggest something to you. In the Bible, I do a series of lessons on prayer. And in the Bible, there are all kinds of prayer postures. Sometimes people do bow their heads in prayer. But for every passage that says somebody bowed their head in prayer, there's another passage that will say they lifted up their eyes to heaven. They looked up. And we tell little children, fold your hands in prayer. I asked my wife one time, why do you tell all the little children, fold your hands in prayer? I said, so they won't hit each other or grab things. You know, just fold your hands. But for every time you ever hear that, there's probably 10 times where they lifted their hands in prayer. And lifting up holy hands in prayer has a dual role. Number one, lift up holy hands in prayer is the idea of showing God you got clean hands. You know, when we were little, I'd come to the table, my mother would say, "Did you wash your hands?" And that's what we'd do. Hold your hands out. Yeah, see, they're clean. Lifting up holy hands in prayer says to God, I have a right to talk to you. I'm lifting up to you hands that I think have been pure enough that I can appeal to you. But secondly, we lift our hands in petition. We plead, we beg, and we use our hands to do that. Our hands are held out when we want something. When we're and more so even when we're children than when we're adults, but even adults do that. We'll say, hey, I've got a gift for you. And we go, well, give it to me. Give it to me. What? Hold them out. That's what prayer is supposed to be. Petitioning God. But this man is so distraught about his life, he not only doesn't lift his hands, he can't even lift his eyes. He can't even look God in the eyes. And this is his prayer. God, be merciful to me, the sinner. And you know what that comes after? Those words come after his beating his breast, beating himself, pounding his chest. We're not talking about patting. We're talking about pounding his chest. He is punishing himself. He is striking his heart. He is hurting his heart because his heart is broken. You're the Pharisee. And you're going, I like where this is going. You're not happy about the tax collector, but you understand. You understand why, of course he would be beating his breast. Of course he wouldn't lift his eyes. Of course he would say, I'm the sinner. Not a sinner, the sinner. Of course he would, because he's a tax collector. And the Pharisee is over there praying his prayer, I'm not like him. And all the Pharisees said, amen. Amen. And he might have very well said at this point, although if they know Jesus, they know better than to do this, but they might have said, preach! And then, verse 14. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. I want you to notice how Jesus is using words here. I want you to notice, because as he's preaching this, he says he moves himself. He moves himself physically. These are great techniques that anybody in theatrics knows. He first talks about the Pharisee who prays to God. I am thankful that I'm not like blah, 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 blah. And then he walks over and says, but this tax collector standing a distance, and he moves himself from that. Listen, what I said, he moves himself from that. He becomes this man, not that man. This man went to his house justified, not that man. Jesus is clearly indicating by his use of the words, this man, that man, who it is that is justified. And then he gives the answer. Why is that man not justified, but this man is? And he says, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, verse 14 doesn't usually shock us for a couple of reasons. It doesn't shock us, first of all, because from the time we're little children, we've heard this parable and we know who the hero is. But if you had heard this for the first time, you would have to make a crucial mental leap from the person whom Jesus depicted as the hero to the one who ultimately ends up being the hero. We're comfortable with the tax collector. The story was told to Pharisees, and most of us don't associate with them, at least not yet. Verse 9 tells us who Jesus is talking to. So let's just go back for a few minutes, not long, but for a few minutes, let's go back and let's now wear the sandals of the sanctimonious. Let's now wear the sandals of the Pharisees. And as they've heard that parable to its conclusion, the Pharisees are probably turning to each other and saying, hey, Jesus, why us? Why'd you pick us? I mean, we're baby stepping. We're doing the work. We're trying to be right. Why did you pick us to be the foil in this story? To be the one who truly is lower than the tax collector on the scale of righteousness. The Pharisees who heard this would have wondered at the salvation of some, the tax collector, and they would have wondered this: why doesn't God like us? Why doesn't Jesus like us? So let's look at who we are. The Pharisees have some pretty good credentials. I mean, there's nothing blatantly wrong with them. We would trust a Pharisee if we lived in that culture. We would buy a used chariot from him. We would leave our children in his care for a while. We would unlock the door of the house so he could go in and retrieve something he left last time he was there. We would trust the Pharisee. Now, granted, he's not a barrel of laughs, but he's a pretty solid character. In addition to that, he's pretty strenuous in his activities for the Lord. I would say much more so. Not more so, much more so than we are. in his outward activities for the Lord. Remember what he said. I fast twice a week. Now, some of you who are into intermittent fasting may say, I got that guy beat. No, you don't. We're talking sundown to sundown fasting, or sunup to sunup fasting. And he's doing that 2 days every week. 48 hours of the week are spent without food or drink for his God. In addition to his fasting, he tithes everything he gets. Everything. Somebody gives him $1, he tithes a dime. He gets a $100 refund, he gives 10%. Everything he has. And Jesus on one occasion even talked about how the Pharisees would tithe their spices, mint, dill, and cumin. So he buys a jar of cumin, and I'm using it in our terminology. Buys a jar of cumin. The first time he opens that up and peels off that seal around the top of it, he takes out 1/10 of it and sets it aside for God. Do you hear that? 1/10 of everything he has. He gets a bag of fries. He counts them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, mine, 1, God's. Everything he has been carefully measured for God's attention. I don't do that. And if I were a Jew, I probably wouldn't have done that carefully. And to some degree, he's grateful. I know his prayer is suspect. He does begin, God, I thank you. And he says, I thank you. So there is some sense in which he is trying to give some credit to God for what he is. I know his prayer is very self-centered. In fact, Jesus indicts him for exalting himself. But I want you to think now, because I'm trying to move you into the Pharisee's seat. And I know you go as reluctantly as I do. But I have to tell you, many of my prayers are really self-centered. And some of our corporate prayers, I don't know about yours, but I know the ones that I hear often are pretty self-centered. They're what we want, and we're thankful for what we have. And I really don't know, and I want to say this because I don't want to put whoever has the final prayer this morning on the spot at all. No, I'm serious. I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable about that. But I don't know when's the last time I heard a prayer that simply said, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. Just be merciful. Which says, I don't deserve it. I mean, I don't deserve whatever you give me. So I'm asking for mercy, not justice. In so many cases, our prayers are prayers for justice and righting wrongs. The only concern the tax collector has about righting a wrong is righting him. He is the wrong. The Pharisee is a man who feels comfortable in his skin, and he believes that the world would be a better place if more people were like him. Wouldn't you agree with that? I think most of us feel that. I think if more people drove like I did, we'd have fewer accidents and fewer frustrated people. I think if more people regarded others the way I regard others, it'd be a more polite world and more civilized. I think if more people cared about other people the way I care about people, it'd be a more merciful world. Could you echo those three statements? You probably could. If more people were like me, the world would be a better place to live. And that's the problem with the Pharisee. These Pharisees may say, look, Ralph, you just painted a really good picture about us. What's wrong with him then? What's really wrong? What is it that Jesus doesn't like about him? And I would have to say it's this. When your religion holds God at a distance and there's no real appeal to God to draw near to you to make you better, your religion is bankrupt. And that's a strong term to use. But that's what Jesus is trying to say to us. Not us here in this audience, in these seats, at this hour of the day. Not that, but us, all of us. When we hold God at a distance, we hold his people at a distance also. The problem with the Pharisee is his religion is consisting of things that are measurable. Remember what he said? I tithe. That's measurable. I fast. That's measurable. But like in the parable we looked at earlier, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is not measurable. It's not a measurable thing. When I love the Lord with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, I don't put limits on that. And measuring my righteousness by others is comforting. And I'm going to tell you, I've done it. I've indicted people because they didn't sing as fervently as I sang, or they didn't study as much as I studied before a class, or they didn't talk to other people about the Lord like I talk to other people about the Lord. And they weren't as friendly to people as I'm friendly to people. Put any criteria you want in that. There is a comfort level in judging ourselves by others. Because you can always choose the person you want to compare yourself to. Right? There's always somebody meaner, ruder, angrier, less involved than you. There's always somebody. There's always a tax collector over there that we can look at and compare ourselves to and feel good about who we are and what we are. And that's what Paul warns against in the very chapter that our brother led us in this morning in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. We have to be so careful in verses 7 and 12 that we don't compare ourselves to each other. Because when we do that, we come off looking pretty good. When in fact, what I'm really doing is giving myself an A for average. That's what I am. So remember verse 9. We're bringing it to a close. Time for you to put your shoes on, wake up the person next to you. We're coming down to the wire. He gave this parable to people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous. And they viewed others with contempt. You know what John said in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 about viewing others with contempt and hating? You can't love God whom you haven't seen, if you don't love your brother whom you have seen. You can't. You can't. So we seek God as sinners, not applicants. We're not filling out a form and judging we're worthy of the job. We're all sinners. We're not holier than thou. And we can't be holier than God. Who can measure up to that? Because when we paint ourselves compared to others and judge ourselves worthy of God's attention because of what we've done or how we compare, we've just added ourselves to the club of the elder brother of the prodigal son, one of the greatest parables Jesus ever told. So I remember in talking about loving, an incident that happened to me when I was in Concord, North Carolina, and preaching. I was also involved in Toastmasters, and on one occasion I got a phone call from a person at one of the local high schools who said, we're getting ready to have a Beta Club induction. It's a really big event on our campus, and wondered if you would come and give a speech. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to do. I'd love to do that. I hadn't been to that high school before, so I went to Northwest High School early. I said, I just want to kind of walk the halls, get a feel for what's going on, kind of get a sense of who the students are before I give this speech. So as I was in the halls and they rang the bells and all the kids poured out, the sea of faces and bodies moving through the halls, and I was standing up against the wall just watching them all go by and trying to get a sense of who's who and what they're about, I saw this really interesting scene. It was a girl who was leaning up against lockers, and she had her arms crossed and her hip thrust out to the side, and she was just looking out of the top of her eyes, rolling them. And above her and overshadowing her was this really big guy, looked like an athlete. He was big, built, and he's got his hand above her, and I could tell he was really, really trying to pressure her about something, talking to her about something, and I said, I have to know more. So I just kind of got in the sea of bodies and moved down that way, and I just stood just a couple of feet away from where they were and just started watching everything going by. But my ear was attuned to what he was saying, and here's what he said to her. When I got in on the conversation, it was this. Oh, baby, you know I love you. I love you so much I'd die for you. And her words were, you're always saying that, but you never do it. I know somebody who did. I know somebody who loved me enough that he died for me. You can't measure that kind of love. You can only accept it. You can't earn it. You can't merit it. You can't apply for it. But you can extend hands petitioning God to give you that. And in Jesus Christ, he will. If you believe Jesus is God's son, and you're willing to live your life for him and turn away from the kind of life you've been living, if you're willing to confess he is your Lord to everybody you see, if you're willing to be immersed in water that your sins might be washed away from you and start life new, I know somebody who loved you enough that he died for you. And if that means something to you today in a way it never has before, I'm inviting you to come to the Christ who justified the man who said, God be merciful to me, the sinner. You come, the sinner, while we stand and sing.